I used to think the walls of our split-level house could hold in anything. Laughter from game nights that ran too late, kitchen smells that reminded me of campground summers, even the muted thuds of my older brother's workouts in the garage. Back then I was 16, a string-bean sophomore who collected worn paperbacks and reported every loose dog I found on the neighborhood app. Dad said I had too much heart and tousled my hair the same way every Tuesday before he sped downtown for work. Mom hummed Fleetwood Mac while watering her succulents. Everything looked postcard bright to the families who waved as they power-walked past our front porch. On the surface, we were ordinary, almost enviable. Dad coached my brother Jacob's varsity wrestling team and loved retelling the story of Jacob's state title to anyone cornered near our grill. Jacob was 2 grades ahead but an entire galaxy cooler, all biceps and bravado, already deciding between scholarship offers. I looked up to him, until I learned looking up required tilting your chin toward a sky that doesn't always love you back. Inside, the power dynamic tilted quietly. If Jacob dented the drywall slamming a door, Dad chuckled that boys will be boys. If I so much as left a mug unwashed, Jacob smirked and listed my failings like a grocery receipt. Dad rarely corrected him. He'd just sigh and adjust the thermostat, as if to fix the climate instead of the character. Mom noticed but pretended her plant babies needed misting whenever the air thickened. The more Jacob puffed up, the smaller I felt, though I kept telling myself brothers bark and brothers bite. It's what brothers do. Still, there were golden hours. The 4 of us sharing drive-in milkshakes. Dad's arms slung around both our shoulders while Jacob boasted and I laughed because laughing felt safer than silence. I clung to those snapshots the way sailors knot rope. Practical hope against an unseen storm. But imbalance has a gravity of its own. One night, after Jacob pinned a rival in under a minute, Dad praised him for being a warrior, and then turned to me with an affectionate yet absent-minded pat. The gesture landed like a reminder. I wasn't built for victory laps. I was an afterthought limping behind. I remember lying awake, counting ceiling fan rotations, and wondering why love in our house was measured by bruises you could brag about. I didn't know it yet, but cracks were already spidering beneath the paint. Quiet fissures that would widen into something cavernous and dark. And when the collapse finally roared through our living room, Dad would act stunned, asking why I drifted so far when he'd never set foot on the fragile bridge between us. The night it happened, the house smelled of victory pizza, pepperoni grease seeping through cardboard while Dad replayed Jacob's semi-final pin on the flat screen. I'd spent the afternoon volunteering at the library's book sale. My biggest triumph, a donated set of Lord of the Rings with the maps still folded crisp. I tried to join their celebration, dropping my backpack by the stairs, but Dad's eyes were locked on Jacob, who flexed for an imaginary crowd. "Did you even come to the match, Nate?" Jacob scoffed, tossing me a crust like I was some family pet. I hadn't. The sale overlapped. I opened my mouth to explain, but Dad waved a dismissive hand. "Your brother just claimed regionals. Let's not kill the vibe." That phrase stuck to me like wet wool. Jacob's grin sharpened. Later, while Mom slept and Dad balanced the checkbook at the kitchen island, Jacob cornered me in the garage. The overhead bulb buzzed, casting us in pale, prison yard light. Boxes of holiday decor lined the walls like silent witnesses. Jacob jabbed my chest, each poke puncturing whatever armor teenage optimism had left me. "You skipped the biggest night of my life," he hissed. "You going to skip nationals too?" "I had a commitment," I muttered, hugging the book set to my ribs. His shove sent hardcovers skittering across the concrete. Pages fluttered like startled birds. Before I could reclaim them, his fist crashed into my jaw, bright, instantaneous flash, copper taste blooming. Another punch followed, then a knee. My body folded, brain stunned by the speed rage can borrow when it's been praised its whole life. The door squeaked. Dad's silhouette filled the frame. Relief flooded me. Dad, the ex-college wrestler, the protector of family image. He saw Jacob's knuckles raised, saw me curled like a question mark on the floor. But instead of pulling Jacob off, Dad rubbed the back of his neck, eyes flicking from my split lip to the trophies glittering on the shelves. "Boys," he sighed, as though we were toddlers fighting over action figures. "Sort this out. Don't make your mother worry." Then he closed the door, slowly, deliberately, as if sealing away an inconvenience. The latch clicked, louder than any slam. Jacob's grin widened. My world shrank. I didn't fight back. Part of me froze, part of me shattered. Every hit afterward felt less like violence and more like confirmation. Dad had decided whose pain was worthwhile. Jacob finally left me heaving beside a toppled snowman centerpiece, bleeding onto plastic wreaths. Upstairs, Dad laughed at some late-night sitcom, the canned studio audience echoing through floorboards while I dragged myself to the utility sink and spat red into rust-stained porcelain. The betrayal wasn't a secret voice or a whispered accusation. It was the thick silence of a father who watched and weighed and found his weaker son disposable. When daylight crept in, bruises flowering purple and green, Dad stood in the doorway of my room. "You two need to learn to get along," he said, like a disappointed camp counselor. "Why aren't you closer? He's your brother." Something in me calcified then. A quiet, brittle thing that would one day hold the weight of decisions I hadn't even imagined yet. I tried to keep living as though the garage floor hadn't become a confessional booth where Dad chose the stronger son's gospel over mine. But every routine now tasted of rust. At school, Jacob strutted the halls with a fading scab on his knuckle, an unspoken badge of how easily he could trim the weak. Our classmates assumed the bruise on my cheek came from freshman football drills I never attended. I let them. Lies were easier to carry when the truth was a slab of marble chained to my ribs. Home turned into a minefield of small humiliations. At dinner, Jacob's laughter boomed whenever I flinched to lift a water glass. Dad would clear his throat, eyes flicking to Mom as if to say, "Kids, right?" Mom refilled the mashed potatoes, keeping her gaze fixed on the bowl. I searched for even a flicker of worry in her smile and found only practiced calm. The expression of someone terrified that acknowledging rot might topple the whole house. I stopped eating in the kitchen. Cold pizza reheated at 2 a.m. became my staple, swallowed beside the open fridge light, praying the compressor's hum would drown the memories replaying on loop. Sleep fled. Nightmares moved in. I saw myself pounding the inside of that closed garage door while Dad whistled on the other side. I'd wake choking on phantom blood, nails digging crescents into my palms. Grades cratered next. Midterms that had once earned me fridge space vanished under red X's. My guidance counselor suggested I take wrestling stats, get closer to your family. I almost laughed. Why not lock the fox in the henhouse too? When I muttered something about a toxic environment, she arched a brow, typed a perfunctory note, and handed me a mindfulness pamphlet. Jacob was the rising star. I was the boy inventing shadows. By spring break, Dad announced a character-building solution. I'd work evenings at his friend's auto shop, learn grit, he said, while Jacob trained for nationals. The shop reeked of diesel and defeat. I scraped grease from lifts until midnight, fingers raw, head buzzing with exhaustion that never tipped into sleep. My paycheck went straight to household bills for discipline. While Jacob's wrestling trips drained airline miles, Dad pretended we had plenty of. Isolation closed in like a vice. Group chats dried up, invitations evaporated. One afternoon, I overheard two classmates gossiping by the bleachers. Nate's got anger issues, heard he swung at Jacob first. Jacob's version had metastasized through the town. He'd restrained his belligerent brother. The story made sense. Skinny kid lashes out, champ brother contains the threat. No one questioned why the supposed aggressor could barely lift a toolbox. I walked away, throat tight, realizing reputation isn't torn by truth, but by whichever voice shouts loudest while you're nursing broken ribs. Rock bottom arrived on a rain-slick Tuesday. The auto shop let me go. Too many mistakes, too little focus. I stumbled home to find Dad waiting with Jacob's college acceptance letter in hand, beaming like a proud curator. "See what commitment gets you?" he said, eyes slipping to my oil-stained uniform. "You should have followed his example." Shame flooded every cavity in my chest. That night, I sat on the backyard swing set, rusted chains whining, and weighed the silence of the river off Route 9 against the static in my skull. For a moment, the idea of waiting until the current forgot my name felt merciful. But even despair has neighbors. A stray dog, mangy, ribs showing, ambled up and dropped a chewed tennis ball at my feet. It stared, tail thumping, as if certain I still had something to offer the world. I threw the ball once, twice, until dawn smeared pink across the horizon. When the dog finally trotted off, I realized I was still alive, still moving. The river could wait. I didn't know it yet, but survival would draw an unlikely witness, someone who'd catch me before the undertow. The collapse was nearly complete. The next step was either oblivion or the outstretched hand I hadn't dared imagine. 6 days after I nearly walked into the river, I actually meant to. It was dusk again, the sky bruised violet, matching the faded halo on my cheekbone. I had $34 in my bank account, a voicemail from the school threatening suspension over missed exams, and a father who'd texted only once since firing me from his friend's shop. Pull yourself together before you embarrass us at graduation. There would be no graduation. Cold mist coiled above the water as I stepped onto the cracked pedestrian bridge. Each plank creaked like an accusation, useless, fragile, forgettable. Below, the current gnawed at the pylons, churning foamy and dark. I gripped the railing, knuckles bloodless. One more half-step and grief would swallow sound. Family, Jacob's laughter, everything. "Hey, kid!" a voice barked behind me. Reflex spun me around. A woman in a neon running vest and muddy trail shoes skidded to a stop. Her ponytail dripped rain. Her eyes were flint. "You dropped this." She held up my wallet. Must have slipped from my pocket when I climbed the rail. Her stare flicked from my soaked sneakers to my shaking hands. Realization widened her pupils. "Don't," she said, voice low, as if gentleness might spook me over the edge. I wanted to snap that she didn't understand. That kindness this late felt cruel, but the wind stole every prepared sentence. Instead, I let myself be shepherded off the rail and onto the gravel shoulder. She introduced herself as Mara Ellis, an ER nurse who ran this trail nightly to outrun her nightmares of failing patients. "You looked like one of mine," she admitted, handing back the wallet. "Lost, bleeding somewhere I couldn't see." I tried to laugh. It cracked into a sob. Everything flooded out. Garage fists, Dad's closed door, the dog with the tennis ball, the river that almost welcomed me. Mara listened without flinching. When I finally went quiet, she cleared her throat like a judge delivering sentence. "My spare room's empty. There's a battered futon and a leaky bathroom, but no one there will hit you. And tomorrow you're coming with me to the hospital volunteer shift. You'll mop floors, fetch blankets, whatever. You need purpose more than pity." I gaped. Strangers aren't supposed to rescue strangers. That's the kind of fairy tale Jacob called weakness. Yet here it was, an offer stripped of charity, built on expectation. Mara produced a laminated AA-style coin from her vest, words etched into the metal. "We begin where we stand." She pressed it into my palm. "Keep it. Prove it matters." That night, her apartment smelled of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. She tossed me a towel, pointed to the bathroom, and ordered, "Hot shower. Make sure the drain's not full of despair when you're done." The stern humor jolted me awake in a way sleep never had. Under scalding water, bruises blossomed anew. Visual ledger of everything swallowed in silence. I traced them, naming each: Dad's disappointment, Jacob's triumph, my own shame. Then I watched soap trace muddy rivulets into the drain. Maybe, I thought, pain is still pain even when no one validates it, but healing starts the moment someone does. Days slid into weeks. I scrubbed our floors until bleach etched my fingerprints, lugged linens, learned to read quiet agony in patients' eyes. Mara Shadow taught me how to wrap gauze, how to speak without shattering brittle hope. After shifts, she'd thrust a journal at me. "Write 10 lines. What hurt and what didn't." I filled pages. The river hurt. Returning from the river didn't. Therapy followed. Cheap sessions at the community clinic where a gray-bearded counselor called my father's inaction passive violence and dared me to believe a different future was possible. At night, I jogged beside Mara, lungs burning, and told the stars above the dark parkway that I wasn't done. One dawn before work, the stray dog found me again. Healthier now, bright-eyed, a new collar jangling. Someone had rescued him too. He bounded up, nudged my pocket, and I realized I still clutched Mara's coin whenever doubt whispered. That morning Mara slapped a stack of college application forms onto the kitchen table. Orderlies can become nurses, and nurses can fix what cowards break, she said. Start here. My hands trembled, not from fear this time but from the unfamiliar weight of possibility. The boy crawling across a garage floor was gone. In his place rose something raw, tentative but stubbornly alive. A seedling punching through concrete because no one remembered to tell it concrete is unbreakable. 4 years is a heartbeat to anyone not clawing their way out of oblivion. To me, it stretched long and strange. An unspooling ribbon of shift work, night classes, and therapy Tuesdays that left salt rings on Mara's Corolla seats. I traded bleach buckets for scrubs, then scrubs for the navy blue jacket that marked me as a full ER tech. My new name badge felt surreal the day it arrived. Nathaniel Carter, EMTB. It was proof in plastic that the universe sometimes lets you redraw your origin story in indelible ink. Outside hospital walls, life stitched itself together with stubborn grace. I rented a shoebox apartment painted the color of oatmeal. The first picture I hung was a laminated copy of Mara's coin under glass. I fostered the stray dog, now christened Gimli for his barrel-chested courage, and discovered that early morning walks alongside the city reservoir felt nothing like the bridge where I'd almost ended. I even learned to deadlift at Mara's insistence, muscles growing where bruises once bloomed. Each plate clang a metronome for a future I owned. Then Jacob's voice spilled from my voicemail like a ghost I hadn't prepared for. Hey, Nate, it's been a while. Dad's sick. Heart failure, stage D. They say he needs a bridge-to-transplant device, maybe an LVAD. We don't have the coverage. Hospital says they need an advocate who understands the system. You. He cleared his throat, the same nervous tick he'd weaponized during childhood taunts. You work there. Could you call me back? I replayed the message twice, numb fingers tracing the image my mind conjured. Dad pale under fluorescent ICU lights, machines humming where his booming voice once filled rooms. Part of me expected jubilation, some primal, fist-pumping thrill at cosmic justice. Instead, I felt a pressure behind my ribs, as though an unseen hand squeezed the coin encased in my chest. That night, Mara poured cheap diner coffee into chipped mugs at our kitchen counter. I laid Jacob's message between us like a scalpel. You owe them nothing, she said, gaze steady. But if you help, do it on your terms. Make sure the boy in the garage survives the choice. I didn't sleep. Old memories surfaced like submerged wreckage. Dad's shoulder pressuring Jacob to him higher, Mom's silence, the garage bulb buzzing. Yet new memories refused to yield. Mrs. Alvarez hugging me after I sat with her post-stroke husband all night, Gimli's tail slapping my calves after another adoption fair, Mara grinning the day I aced pharmacology. Morning broke. A thin smear of gold across the blinds, and I knew. Justice wasn't a ledger. It was the freedom to decide who you'd be despite the debt. I drove to the same hospital that now hired me, signed in as family, and found Dad curled amid tubes and telemetry beeps. Jacob stood beside him, edges dulled. He was heavier, eyes ringed dark, a former champion with no arena left. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Listen, I said, voice firmer than I ever knew it could be. I'll translate your options. I'll navigate insurance, advocate for compassionate use meds, and arrange rehab. But outside this room, your story no longer overwrites mine. You don't get to decide who I am, or whether I'm worth protecting. Jacob swallowed, tears silvering his lashes. I was a kid. Dad pit us against each other. You became an adult and kept swinging, I replied. But today isn't about blame. It's about choice. Mine. Dad stirred, eyes fluttering open. Weak, whispered hoarse. Nate, you came. There was wonder in his rasp, maybe regret, maybe fear. I gripped the bed rail instead of his hand. I'm here as a professional, Dad. Let's start with your ejection fraction and go from there. I spent 6 brutal weeks steering paperwork through labyrinthine corridors, translating cardiology jargon into hope Jacob and Mom could digest. Not once did I step inside the old family home. We met on neutral ground. Conference rooms, cafeteria tables, the quiet garden where families traded prayers. Sometimes Dad would ask, voice brittle, why weren't we closer? I'd describe guardianship filings, medication schedules, but never the garage. Healing, I realized, wasn't owed. It was gifted or withheld, and I wasn't ready to unwrap that box. 6 months later, Dad received his transplant. Discharge day, Jacob tried to hug me. I stepped back, offered my hand instead. Live better, I said. He nodded, understanding the handshake was both promise and boundary. Driving home, I rolled the coin between my fingers at a red light. Gimli barked at pigeons in the back seat. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and almost didn't recognize the man staring back. Eyes clear, shoulders set, unburdened by someone else's gravity. The river glimmered in the distance, harmless now, just water reflecting sky. I whispered, we begin where we stand, and turned toward the apartment where bills, laundry, and tomorrow's shift awaited, ordinary miracles stitched by my own hands. 2 years slip by the way dusk fades into night. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to pinpoint. Dad's new heart thrums on borrowed electricity. A scar splits his sternum like an untidy zipper, but he walks Gimli beside the same river that almost kept me. The doctors warn him stress is lethal, so our conversations stay surface shallow. Medication timetables, the Cubs batting lineup, whether spring feels earlier this year. He never mentions the garage and I never open that door. We are two sailors waving from different decks. Grateful the ocean no longer rages between us, certain it would swallow us whole if we tried to swim the gap. Jacob attends therapy now, court-ordered after bar fight assault, though he tells me he wants to deal with anger. We meet once a month in a bakery that smells like cinnamon salvation. His shoulders slump when he speaks. For the first time, his gaze doesn't hunt for someone smaller to conquer. He apologized twice. The words fluttered, fragile, an origami dove in trembling hands. I accepted them not because they rebuilt anything, but because refusing would chain me to the rubble. Forgiveness, I learned, is less kingly pardon than travel light. You drop the stones so you can keep walking. Mom tends a community garden behind the high school. Tomatoes like tiny suns spill from her baskets. Sometimes she mails me jars of sauce with handwritten labels, for the boy who always liked extra basil. No note explaining why she watered silence while her sons tore holes in themselves. I could demand it, but answers are currency in a market I no longer shop. Mara and I remain housemates in theory, co-conspirators in practice. Our schedules orbit odd hours. Sometimes weeks pass in sticky note conversations. Fresh coffee, don't die today scrawled beside the pot. Yet on rare shared mornings we jog the reservoir trail, synchronized breath marking the distance between then and now. People ask if we're together. We shrug, unbothered by labels. Love is the architecture of our friendship, but its shape is our secret, and secrets can nurture when they don't bruise. I teach EMT prep at the community college twice a week. On the first day, I give every student a blank metal coin. Scratch your own words, I tell them. Someday you'll need to remember who stamped them. Mine still reads, we begin where we stand. The phrase has weathered laundry cycles, CPR drills, and one terrifying night when a crash victim bled through my gloves and whispered, please don't let me disappear. I didn't. She woke 3 days later asking for the nurse with the quiet eyes. Last month I drove past the old house. New owners painted the siding teal. The garage door stood open, revealing bicycles where trophies once gleamed. I parked a block away, heart steady, and watched a father adjust his kid's helmet. He laughed, a sound clear and bright, then knelt to tie the child's shoe. No echoes of fists, no bruised ghosts on the concrete. The universe had repurposed the scene, and I felt neither envy nor rage, only relief that space can heal when people refuse. Some nights the boy I was knocks on my dreams. He asks if we're safe yet, if Dad ever opened the door, if forgiveness means forgetting. I kneel beside him and explain that safety isn't a finish line but a direction, that doors don't open themselves, and that remembering without venom is the truest victory we'll ever claim. He usually smiles, satisfied, and fades back into sleep. I don't know if Dad will live 10 more years or 10 more minutes. I don't know if Jacob's repentance will outlast the next provocation, or if Mom's tomatoes will ripen sweeter when she finally names her guilt. But I know this. I am not the bruises, nor the silence, nor the river that almost wrote my obituary. I am the breath that followed, the hand that reached back to haul me forward, the footsteps that kept going when history tried to nail them in place. So if anyone asks why my family and I were never close, I'll tell them closeness is forged, not inherited, and the forge requires heat both people agree to stand inside. Dad stepped out. I stepped away. And in the distance between those choices, I built a life wide enough to hold grief and joy in the same palm. Neither canceling the other, both proof I survived. I flipped my coin each dawn, silvery flash catching sunrise, and let it land without looking. The lesson was never which side faces up. It was trusting that whichever does, I have the strength to begin again right where my feet already touch earth.
If you made it this far, you're officially part of the drama. Subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done?